Good morning. Welcome to the 24th Annual Federal Interagency Holocaust Remembrance Program. I'm Tony Fowler of the United States of Education, and I've been honored to be the chair of this year's program. Since 1994, shortly after the opening of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., representatives of the federal agencies have worked together to provide a meaningful educational experience for the federal workforce and the public about the Holocaust, the mass murder of 6 million European Jews, as well as members of other persecuted groups, such as Roma, Poles, Slavs, and homosexuals by the German Nazi regime during World War II. Today, we continue this tradition, and as you will see, we have amazing individuals among us, and one on the screen, who we believe will have a profound effect on your lives. This program would not be possible without the efforts of our committee, and I would like to especially thank Jeff Nishkawi and Tina Hollerer of the USDA, who put so much effort into today's program. I would also like to thank my two colleagues at the U.S. Department of Education, Acting Assistant Secretary Cynthia Dorfman and Acting General Counsel Phil Rosenfeld. In addition, I would like to acknowledge a number of the members of our audience. Helene Baker from the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, the head political department. Catherine Lehman, Chair of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. Robert G. Taub, Chairman of the Postal Regulatory Commission, Carolyn Lerner, Special Counsel from the Office of the Special Counsel, Patrick Pizzella, Acting Chairman, the Federal Labor Relations Authority, Mark A. Robbins, Vice Chairman, the Merit Systems Protection Board, Richard Griffin, General Counsel of the National Labor Relations Board, Ernest Dubester, member of the Federal Labor Relations Authority, Winona Scott, Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Dexter Brooks of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, Sarah Reza of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and Rabbi Shira Strutman, the Senior Rabbi of the 6th and I Street Synagogue. And now, I would like to invite you to stand for the presentation of the colors and the singing of the national anthem, which will be sung by the 6th and the City Chorus, a collaboration of singers from the 6th and I Historic Synagogue, the Turner Memorial AME Church, and the Metropolitan AME Church, under the direction of Marty Lamar. At this time, I would like to introduce our moderator for today's program, Ruth Marcus. Ruth is a columnist for the Washington Post, specializing in American politics and domestic policy. Last year, she was named deputy editor of the Post editorial page, and she also appears regularly on TV and radio. And here's Ruth.
Hi, thank you so much for being here today. And I just want to say that I'm humbled and honored to be here and to have been asked to be here. And I wanted to start really by thanking you all as federal employees, which is something that I don't think you hear enough, as the sister of a federal employee, as the sister-in-law of a federal employee, who's there, hi. It's the sister-in-laws who turn up. I was going to say as the former wife of a federal employee, but I'm actually the actual wife of a federal employee, but he's a former federal employee. I know how hard you work. I know that you're motivated by a sense of public service. I know the same values that brought you here today are the values that animate you in your work. So thank you for that. I want to say that I wish my father, who was not a Holocaust survivor, but who was scarred by the Holocaust in the way that everyone in his generation, certainly every Jew in his generation, was scarred by it, could be here with us today. He passed away a few years ago, but he might have told you this story that I've never actually told this as an adult, and I'm a little bit embarrassed by it for reasons you'll understand. But he might have told you about the trouble that I got into in 6th grade when I called my Hebrew school teacher, and I'm really sorry, this is going to sound so offensive. I called my Hebrew school teacher Hitler Hurwitz. I thought it was a clever alliteration about a dictatorial teacher. I got into so much trouble, and I really learned, I should have known better then. I know better now, but it was a really valuable lesson that has taken too many people, far too many people, as we've been reminded to some extent this year, far too long to learn about the power and danger of analogies to Hitler and the Holocaust. This was a unique evil that cannot be trivialized, and so if I'm making my reparations for that 12-year-old irresponsibility today, thank you for giving me that opportunity. The Holocaust really can't be comprehended. I faced the challenge of trying to explain it to my young children when I didn't know that this was going to come up, but they watched I popped in a video of The Sound of Music, and so I got these questions. Who were the Nazis? Why were they bad? Why did they hate Jews? Who did they kill? And the question that most seared me and moved me was from my younger daughter. She might have been 5 or 6 at the time, who kept demanding, what were their names? She couldn't grasp the immensity of the 6 million. There is power in both that unimaginable number, as the 6 million paperclips efforts demonstrated, and in the remembrance of the individual as the stumbling stones that are placed throughout Germany and throughout other countries in Europe have taught us. As people in my father's generation give way to those who did not personally experience the Holocaust or even live through its time, the importance of preserving the memory of this horror becomes even more important. And my older daughter, not the one who demanded to know the names, but her older sister, is a college student, and she's taken part in a Holocaust education program in the inner city of Philadelphia. And she says that the kids, these high school kids, come with almost no knowledge of the Holocaust or its scope. And those who know about the Holocaust know for one reason: they have read Elie Wiesel. No one did more to educate the world and to insist on the importance of continuing to educate the world about the horrors of the Holocaust than Elie Wiesel. And I promise this is going to be my last family anecdote, but indulge me one more time. My husband has a story about his first night away as a freshman at the University of Wisconsin. His roommate was a nice Wisconsin farm boy who had never met a Jewish person before. His parents said as they were moving in, "Oh, Leibowitz, that's an interesting name," which might have been a clue. And in truth, my husband was a nice Jewish boy from New Jersey who had probably never met a farm boy before. So they're laying in their beds that first night in their dorm room, the lights are out, and the roommate turns to John and says, "I just want you to know, I read Night by Elie Wiesel, and I think what Hitler did was dead wrong." And the punchline really of this story is that my husband had not read Night by Elie Wiesel, but it's an illustration of that that power of education. Many years later, the weekend that Elie Wiesel passed away, Sarah Bloomfield of the Holocaust Museum came through for me with an op-ed that she wrote on a borrowed computer right after Wiesel's funeral, and she too described in this op-ed the power of Wiesel's words, and I'll quote, "I was an untested middle school teacher in Sydney, Australia, fresh out of an American college. I chose to have them read Wiesel's iconic memoir, Night, in hopes that it might address and ameliorate some of the rampant prejudice among my students in this multi-ethnic working-class community teeming with immigrants and resentments. That is the power of Elie Wiesel. He reminded us of the worst of humanity. He insisted that it not be forgotten, but in doing so, he also evoked the better angels of our nation. Let's listen in his own words.
And it came to pass that one day a just man decided he will go to a very sinful city where everybody is wrong, where everybody is either a thief or a murderer or both, and surely a hypocrite. And this just man decided he must save that city. How will he save it? By screaming, "Men and women, repent, remember, you will not live forever, and one day justice will reign, and you will be punished." So he came, and he carried pickets, and he wrote articles in the newspapers. There were newspapers there who were as hypocrite as anywhere else, and nothing happened. In the beginning, people were amused. At last, there was someone who entertained them. But then, they were bored. He went on screaming and screaming, "Remember, remember that falsehood is wrong. Remember that murder is suicide." One day, after many, many, many years, a child stopped him in the street. And the child said, "Poor stranger, why do you go on? Don't you see it's useless?" "Yes," said the just man, "it is useless." "Then why do you continue?" said the child. "I will tell you why," said the stranger. "In the beginning, I was convinced that if I would shout and shout loud enough, I will manage to change them. Now I know I never will. But if I go on screaming and yelling and shouting and protesting and warning louder and louder, it is because I don't want them to change me." My good friends from the United States and from abroad, in a way, I am sure that this story illustrates your code of behavior as it has illustrated mine. For many, many years, and in moments of despair, it still is my code of behavior. When I do see the cynicism in the world, when I do see the dangers, when I do realize that whatever we do, we are so weak, we are so terribly weak. Well, should I give up? I won't. I don't want the world to change me. However, it is meetings such as this, it is gatherings such as this, it is friendships such as the ones that are being created here since yesterday, that tell me that occasionally I am wrong. Occasionally, my pessimism may be wrong. And I start believing that perhaps one gesture may have an effect on destiny. that maybe one person can change the universe, in good and in bad, but in bad too. And one meeting can carry a meaning that goes far beyond the people who are involved in that meeting. And one decision may affect more than the people who have made that decision. So, as you can see, in spite of the lateness of the hour, I suddenly turn optimistic. But then tonight, my friends from the United States, on the Council, in Congress, in the Senate, the Smithsonian, and my friends from abroad, all those who have spoken, and on behalf you have spoken, it is thanks to you that some hope is justified.
So I'm going to introduce first Renee Fink, who is a remarkable woman who I've gotten to know over the last few days by immersing myself in these wonderfully interesting videos that you can find online about her experience as a hidden child. Renee was born in the Netherlands to a German family that had fled Hitler. At the age of 4, she was put on the back of a bicycle, pedaled by a woman she did not know, and taken off, never to see her parents again. She was sheltered by an amazing Catholic family with 8 children who took the enormous risk of welcoming Renee into their home, where she was raised essentially as their child. After the war, she was reunited with her grandmother. They eventually came to the United States. She lived with, then with some cousins. And for years, her experience as a hidden child was something that she simply didn't talk about, didn't discuss with her own children or with others. And then in 1991, there was a conference about hidden children, and Renee Fink attended this conference and began to speak out about her experiences, which are searing and amazing and powerful. Renee Fink.
Thank you, Ruth. I very much want to thank the Federal Interagency Committee for holding this Yom HaShoah event. It makes me more proud and happy to be an American citizen. There are a few words I just want to say, because how many of us have such a forum in a lifetime? Let me just start by, as we are gathered here to remember the Holocaust, I want to say a few words about my good fortune in being able to be here. First, I mean by that I'm alive. Of course, I wasn't meant to be alive, but in my small case, the German plan failed because of the courage of the Vandenbrink family. They saved me by hiding me. They had the courage to stand up for what was right. And in a conversation I had just a few minutes before this program began with one of the committee members, the question came up, what would any of us do today if placed in such a situation? At any rate, the Holocaust happened not only because of the perpetrators, but also because of the masses in Europe and abroad who stood silently by and allowed it to happen. I feel that the bystanders played a crucial role. We now know from Eric Lichtblau's New York Times article of 2013 that altogether, this is shocking, but altogether 42,500 and counting, continuing to count. Concentration camps have been documented and identified in Europe. Yes, impossible to believe the number of 42,500. How can so many people claim to have known nothing? They saw nothing, heard nothing, smelled nothing. It's amazing. We have to conclude that such gruesome reality can only exist with the aid of bystanders, of the silent ones. As a proud American citizen in a country of such very rich diversity and creativity, if there is one lesson to be learned, it is to protect our democracy and speak up for what is right. Thank you.
I'm going to do something introducing Roman Kent that is not the laziness of borrowing from somebody else's words, but it is a little lazy, but it's also the magnificent irony, historical irony of using the words to honor him when he was awarded the Officer's Cross of the Order of Merit of the Federal Republic of Germany. This is one of the highest honors in Germany, which has done a really impressive job of acknowledging and not suppressing its historical role. And what was said when Roman Kent was awarded this honor: in your hometown of Łódź, Poland, you spent your early childhood years free from worry with your loving family. Then Hitler's invasion of Poland changed the life that you knew. Still very young, you went through an endless ordeal in the Łódź ghetto and the concentration camps of Auschwitz, Gross-Rosen, and Flossenburg. On April 23, 1945, you and your brother were liberated by American soldiers. Of your family, only you, your sister, and your brother survived. In 1946, you came to the United States under the children's quota of the United States government's Displaced Persons Act. Here you could begin another life, and despite the memories and enormous sadness that you carried, you triumphed in the personal accomplishment and moved forward. After graduating from Emory University, you were able to build a career from the ground up, the American way, ending up with a very successful international trade business that you ran for several decades. But here I'll depart. That wasn't all. Roman Kent never forgot, never allowed others to forget the Holocaust, and continued to work for the interests of survivors, for the restitution of survivors, and to take care of the righteous Gentiles like the Vandenbrink family who helped people survive. He's been president of the International Auschwitz Committee, chairman of the American Gathering of Jewish Holocaust Survivors, and treasurer of the Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany. His story is amazing. Once again, I'm sending you to the internet if you, after you hear him, you want to hear more. There's a beautiful film at the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz that has him back there in this camp where he endured such horrors. Roman Kent.
Thank you. After such a wonderful introduction, I may be better off to say nothing than to thank you and sit down. But that may not be fair, so I will try to say a few words. A few days ago, Jews throughout the world sat at their tables to remember and to celebrate the Passover holiday. The teaching of our sages encourages us to remember that thousands of years ago, we were slaves in the land of Pharaoh and Egypt. Avadim hayinu b'paro b'Mitzrayim. Thus, the Jewish people are bidden to remember and to understand our past. In a way, the mystery of Jewish memory and history is our memory. And the secret of our survival and our humanity is remembrance. Now, we are gathered to fulfill a modern-day commandment imposed upon us by Jewish people by the contemporary history. The faith of the 6 million martyrs who perished as slaves during the Holocaust. Passover and Yom HaShoah represent the two extremes of Jewish history: redemption and destruction, hope and despair. Passover is celebrated privately and individually, even though the redemption was public and the miracle held by all. Remembrance is private and intensely personal. By contrast, Yom HaShoah, which commemorates the private survivors and personal losses of the Jewish people, is observed publicly, as we are here today. Yet, there is a simple explanation to this paradox. Jews don't want to be alone at Yom HaShoah. We draw strength and encouragement from each other. The presence of community makes it possible for us to collectively commemorate the destruction that devastated the Jewish people. By drawing together, the Jewish people testify to its survival, solidarity, and defiance. Despite despair, we are consoled when we realize that the enemy fell short of its goal, for the Jewish people are alive. I am often asked how long I was in Auschwitz. My answer is, I do not know. But what I do know, that a minute in Auschwitz was like an entire day, a day was a year, and a month an eternity. How many eternities can one person have in a single lifetime? I don't know the answer to that either. Zahor, pamiętaj, remember. This was one word that my father frequently uttered to me during the Holocaust. Today, more than 70 years later, that command to remember is indeed superfluous. For me, a survivor of Auschwitz, to forget the historic, horrific experience endured in the concentration camp, even for one moment, is impossible. Witnessing the atrocities committed at the entrance gate to Auschwitz was more than enough to keep me awake at night until the end of time. It is there that Germans welcomed and began to brutalize they new guests. Horses were driven into families and groups of us, forcing us to apart and separating us, often forever, as camp guards slashed us with their whips. Today, even after 70 years, the daily cruelty and human behavior in the camps is still etched in my mind. The look of pleasure of the murderers as they torture innocent men, women, and children is beyond description and lingers in my consciousness. How can I erase the sight of the human skeletons, just skin and bones, but still alive? How can I ever forget the smell of burning flesh that permeates the air? Many of us came to Auschwitz not knowing each other in life, but most of us left Auschwitz in the chimney in the forms of the white-blue smoke. The heart-breaking weeping of the children torn from their mother's arm by the brutal torturers will ring in my ears until I am laid to rest. I continue to wonder if the cries of these children ever penetrated the heaven's gate. We survivors continuously came to face with death, yet despair was not our response. Despite hopelessness, we created life out of the world of darkness, and we now remember the all-consuming evil we were forced to endure. We survivors cannot, dare not, to forget the millions who were murdered, for if we were to forget, then the conscience of mankind would be buried alongside the victims. We must all remember, but just to remember is not enough. Deeds as well as thoughts are crucial. It is our mutual obligation to install in the current and future generation the understanding of what happens when virulent prejudice and hatred are allowed to flourish. We must all teach our children tolerance and understanding at home and in school. For tolerance cannot be assumed, it has to be taught. And we must make clear that hate is never right and love is never wrong. When I think about the Holocaust, as I often do, there are only a few acts I consider holy and which redeem my faith in humanity and mankind. Without hesitation, the courageous and heroic deeds of the non-Jews, those we call righteous Gentiles, who saved Jewish lives during the Holocaust, fall into this category. To save innocent Jewish life, the righteous Gentiles endured their own lives, and in most instances, the lives of their families. These courageous Gentiles, just a few among the millions, showed the world that the answer to tyranny and indifference is involvement. Their deeds should serve as an example of what could have been done, as an indictment of what was not done, and as a moral torch in a world of oppression and darkness. This righteousness, noble by deeds, but modest by character, taught us that even in the hell known as the Holocaust, the individual had a chance and choice and the capacity to behave humanly if she or he only cared and had the courage to act accordingly. We survivors share a common goal with the current generation. And we hopefully with the future generation. We survivors do not want our past to be our children's future. I hope and believe that this generation will build on mankind's great tradition, tempered by the understanding that this tradition must embrace pluralism and tolerance, decency and human rights for all people. Opposition to anti-Semitism and to racism of any sort should be commonplace and not the exception. But there remains much more to be done. We all must be involved and stay involved. No one should be a spectator. I feel so strongly about this point that if I had the power, I would add the 11th commandment to the 10th commandment accepted by all. You should never, never be a bystander. Thus, I hope against hope that there is a brighter future for mankind. After all, we all live on the same planet. Perhaps, just perhaps, when we finally realize that we are also one family, one people, we can then make sure that tragedies such as Auschwitz will never happen to us or to any other people. Thank you.
I'm not sure anything more can be said after that powerful address, but there's more wisdom and remembrance to be heard from both of these folks. Before I start, I wanted to ask if there are any other in the audience, either survivors or children of survivors. Roman spoke about the future survivors. If anybody is in that position, just raise your hand so we know. Thank you. It's difficult to be a survivor, and it's difficult to be the child of survivors because the legacy of that pain from, I don't know this personally, but I know it from reading, lives on. Let's honor the importance of remembering and go back, if you would, to the time of, as the Nazis took power. Roman, tell us about, and this is going to have a story with a little bit of uplift to it, which we might need right now. tell us about being moved to the ghetto, and tell us about Lala.
The story of moving to ghetto is nothing special. But, you know, right now here, I imagine that the normal family usually have children, and to round up the family, we usually have a pet in our family. We also had a pet in our family before the war. We had a dog, her name was Lala. Lala in Polish was a doll, and she indeed was a doll to us. The unusual thing about this dog was also that she was not only loved by us, the children and the parents, but during the summer where we went to the country, to a villa, she was also loved by some of her friends. So when we came back to the city in the fall, she usually had some puppies, some children. Well, you know, we all loved the puppies. Our mother was something else, and she did not want to have the dog with the puppies in our home. But since we had a factory which was across the street, she was spending the time in the factory with the puppies. When we went to ghetto, as I was asked, and I gave you the introduction so you will understand why I gave you the introduction about our dog. Our parents, of course, said there is no way we can take the dog with the 4 puppies to ghetto. We were lucky that our father had a room with a kitchen, with a running water, and I want you to know that in ghetto to have a room and a kitchen and running water was also something. It was not easy to get. So we went there, and when the last day came, we all as a family went to the ghetto. We, the children, didn't understand everything so well. You are looking at me right now, an old man with gray hair, or some of it which is left. But then I was a little boy. And what we were interested in is our dog and the puppy. So we came to ghetto, and our parents were, of course, very petrified, and they were talked with the neighbors in subdued voices. We, the children, were only thinking, what will be with our dog? Finally, tired, we went to sleep. We woke up at night because there was some scratching at the door. Who do you think it was there? Whom do you think we were greeting? Our dog, Lala. She came in from our home to the ghetto, which was miles and miles away. And this was an awful night, snowing, raining. There were 24 seasons in one day. And the moment she'd seen us, she started to lick our hands and our faces. Finally, we went to sleep. In the morning, she scratched at the door, asking to be let out. So we let her out. And so, for the next few weeks, the routine happens that in the morning, our dog asks to be let out. In the evening, at night, she's asked to be let in. And she divided her life, I would say, between her natural children, which were left in the factory, and us, her regular children, family. This is maybe important because you cannot describe to children the horrors, what were happening in the concentration camp. But through a dog, you can explain them that love has no boundaries. And this dog showed that the German guards, the barbed wire did not disturb them, to somehow connect her life to her natural children, and as they accept the adopted family. So this is a real nice story which can be taught to children.
And you've written a book about Lala. You told the story of Lala to your children and
Yes.
grandchildren, and you've written a book
You
about
see,
her.
this is why we have a moderator who knows more than I about my life. But she's absolutely right. And my children like the story about the dog that, you know, small children always like to be told a story when they go to bed. And almost every day they ask me, tell us the story about Lala. I think they knew it by heart, but they still ask me to tell them the story. So I did write a little book about Lala. But now I will tell you something that you may not know. This story about the dog Lala was picked up by Spielberg, by the Shoah Foundation, and by the Discovery Channel, and they are making a film for children about the story of Lala.
I did not know that.
Yeah, that's what I said.
So, Renee, you were only 4 when the Germans came to your seaside town, I'm not going to try to pronounce, in Holland, where your parents had fled in the hopes of safety. And when I was watching and reading some of your things yesterday, you actually, this is going to have a dog segue, you said we were lower than dogs or cockroaches. Do you have a memory of these times? Do you remember that? And tell, in the context of what you remember, tell your story, please, about the day you were put on the bicycle.
It's very, very difficult to know what is direct memory for a 4-year-old and what is actually memory from photographs or from reading books. We get it in any number of ways. Some of my memory may come from fellow child survivors, from all the conferences where we meet each other and we consider each other mishpucha, or family. So I do distinctly remember leaving my parents, going on a bicycle, but in those days, I think 2 things were at work. Adults didn't share things with children long ago. Children were to remain innocent. But in wartime, it was much more serious. It was that no one was to know anything. And knowledge was a way to implicate others. And we had to, it's the way the underground or the resistance worked. It is the way individuals worked. We must only know one tiny piece of what was happening and not the overall story. So I can tell you I went on a very nice woman's bicycle and my mother and father were standing there, and what I had no idea about was that I would never see them again, and I wouldn't know until I was well into middle age whatever happened to them because nobody was telling me. And I remember coming into a very large house, not knowing what I was doing there. And but now in retrospect, I think the ultimate act of love, and Roman has talked about love, is to be willing to give up your child if you think it will increase the chances of a life being saved. And I have to give every last bit of credit to my mother and father for having the wisdom and the strength to do what they did.
And what did you learn happened to your parents?
I learned very much later, because when I was a child and I would repeatedly ask, when are they coming back? When will I see them once the war was over? There were no answers. And children understand things implicitly. they're very sensitive. They have a feeling of what is going on around them. They pick up on things. So the silence that met my questions made me stop asking. And then long into, I think maybe my late teen years, I was reading the memoirs of a great uncle. He had come to America in the late 30s. He had left Germany as a physician, and he was practicing medicine here. And he had written memoirs in very formal, old-fashioned, flowing German. And among those letters was one from my mother's sister, who spoke about what had transpired in the war. And I think I got an inkling then. But it was so personally disturbing that I promptly forgot it.
Roman, the title of your autobiography, and by the way, if you look on Amazon, the new copies, $5,000. Telling you. What? Just, the title of your autobiography is Courage Was My Only Option. Tell us why that title.
Maybe there is not exact way I can tell you why is this title, but if you will notice, the forewords to this book was made by Larry Eagleberger. I think very few people usually associate the name of Larry Eagleberger as to who he was. He died a few years ago. But he was our Secretary of State. Now, everybody remembers Kissinger. He was after Kissinger, and therefore his name is forgotten. He was, as you can see, Secretary of State. He was what I can say, a vibrant Republican. He knew I am a Democrat, but he always told me, Roman, with you, I can live. You are okay. And the best example is that he wrote the forewords to the book. And he was a good friend of mine. We were working together on a number of issues, particularly connected with the reparation from Germany and so on. So we discussed it, and he sometimes wondered what made me survive. And of course, this is a question which is not only asked by him, but it is asked by many people. Why did you survive? And the answer to this is there is not one single answer. Why did I survive? It is a combination of many factors, and maybe the common denominator of the many factors is that somehow, somewhere in between is the word courage. You had to have courage. You had to have some guts to be able to survive. So that is most probably the reason why.
How old were you when you were at Auschwitz? And is there?
I was a young teenager.
And is there a moment of courage that you recall, or was it simply the courage to persist?
No, there are a few individual acts that I say could be courage. In Auschwitz, for example, there was courage, maybe that was stupidity, because, you know, maybe most of us have one day a year where we are fasting, we don't eat food, and we think we are hungry. But that's not hunger. Hunger is if you are hungry consistently, day after day and day after day. Like in Auschwitz, when we got a soup and a piece of bread and there was nothing. I was hungry. Now, I have seen every day there was the kapos and the black elders were walking with survivors, and the survivors were carrying in a blanket a mountain of bread to be distributed. And we all look at the mountain of bread. Now, one day, like I say, you can say it courage, I say stupidity. When I thought that the capos don't see it so well, I ran out from the place between the barrack and I grabbed a loaf of bread. I was clutching the loaf of bread to my chest and I ran back in between the barracks. And I was lucky, that was maybe the courage, that the capos didn't see. But I did not foresee that there were a few hundred survivors in between watching the parade of bread the same way like I. And the moment I grabbed the loaf of bread and was in between the blacks, they jumped on me. And there were 200, 300 people on top of me grabbing the loaf of bread from me. Till the capos have seen a disturbance and they clean it up. No, you can say it was courage. It was stupidity also. So it's a combination. And there are a couple of instances in other camps too that you can say, yes, you have. This is why I say that courage had to be involved in some of the acts which otherwise you can call stupid.
Because I would guess if you don't have courage, then you're simply resigned, and resignation it just leads to giving up.
But if you remember a moment ago, I said there were several factors that contributed to my survival. Another factor that contributed to my survival was that I was always together with my brother. Now, it is true that we risk our life to be together. But being together, we could help each other when one was so weak or sick or hungry. So this was another factor that contributed to my survival. And if we have time, there are a few instances I could say why and what.
Renee, Roman went through hell in the camps. Your experience was different. There was hunger. I think you described eating tulip bulbs, of all things. But you also described this, and it's surprising to people, and maybe difficult even for you to say it that way, that war period is one of the happiest of your life.
It does sound like a contradiction in terms. My life with my parents was, it was perfect. I was the first child in a very long time. I was very doted upon. And when that came to an end, I had a new family. And bit by bit, I was, well, from the moment I appeared, they accepted me. I just didn't know who they were. But over the course of years, and they risked their lives for years, none of us could ever know if we volunteer for the job that it wouldn't be a week or 2 weeks, but that it would go on year after year. Whatever food we had was shared equally. Punishments were shared equally. I was punished like all their children. There was a lot of love within the family, but it wasn't shown. It was a very undemonstrative family. And one of my brothers said, when I say brothers or sisters, I have no biological siblings, but these are my beloved Catholic foster brothers and sisters. When he came from Australia to visit, he said, and he was very angry, remember that time Papa got up? The only time he ever touched me in my entire life was at the dinner table. Do you remember that night? We were all sitting around the dinner table and Papa came and patted us each on the head once. So despite that, Papa treated me in a very special way, even though the punishments were serious. But I was loved there, and I was not second fiddle. And when we had food, I got equal portions, and when we didn't have food, we all got equal portions. And after the war, it changed for many of us. We didn't all go out on the town square and dance. I mean, we did that, but that was so very quickly over. And then the reality of life, and this is what people have to understand when they make war, and we see war, that it plays out for the rest of their lives, as Romans speaks about. It is transferred, the trauma is transferred to their children, and it is never ending. But yes, we were very, very hungry in Holland in the winter of 1944, and we were very cold and hungry, went to bed thinking about food. But I don't compare it to being in Auschwitz. We don't compete, we don't compare.
There's so much to discuss, and the time is short. Roman, I guess I want to take you to the moment of liberation and your arrival in the United States. What was that moment of liberation like, and how does one keep on going after the horror?
It's funny that our mind can travel millions of miles from one subject to another one in a fraction of a second. We're talking here about a child survivor, and now suddenly we're jumping to the liberation. And our mind can still absorb it if we are still able to think properly. Technically speaking, if you're talking about my liberation, if I were to say what it was, I must admit, I don't know what liberation was. I did not know what freedom was. It took my mind a certain period of time to accept it. Why do I say this? Because we are all aware of the Hollywood type of scenario and scripts and so on. I was liberated. I have my liberation done. If you were to make a script in Hollywood, that's what it was. I was liberated on a highway, marching with thousands of other survivors. And by the way, that was the one time that I was hidden among Gentiles, not among Jews. So we had few thousand of us marching for 3 nights because the Germans were afraid to march during the day because the planes were, American planes were above us and they were shooting everybody. So after 3 nights of liberation, the 4th night they woke us up from wherever we were, and they told us, get out from the forest, start marching. And I couldn't march already anymore. I told to my brother, Leon, it seems to me that might be our last day. I cannot march anymore. And I just, as a PS, I want to say to you that whoever couldn't march during the night fell down on the highway. The Germans just took the gun and shot him. So during the few days, there were a few thousand people laying on the highway shot. And I say, I don't think I will be able to do it. And as we were drifting towards the end, we heard a large noise. We didn't know what it is. Suddenly, as the people, I've seen the German guards dropping their gun and running to the highway. And we've seen some big tanks with the white star on it. And this is how I was liberated. I thought it was the Russian tank, but no, it was the American tanks, with the American soldiers. And this, whatever they had on the top of it, they opened it, and as the Germans were running to the forest, they opened it and they started to throw to us the K-ration, things like this. This is how I was liberated. I didn't know what it is, freedom. It took a little time to understand.
We have here not just federal employees, but some students from the Jewish Primary Day School of the nation's capital. And there are some sixth graders, and I think it's so important. It's magnificent that they're here, and it's really important and it's just such a special opportunity because the day is going to come, thanks to Steven Spielberg and the Shoah Project and the Holocaust Museum. We will have the video testimonials, but being able to hear from people themselves who have experienced this is so important and powerful. So I'm very glad that we have students here today. And there's time for just a few questions from them. The first question, I think, is going to come from Isaac Tromer.
Renee, I have a question. Was it difficult for you to leave the Vanden Brinks home after spending a lot of your childhood with them? And was it weird going back to Judaism after practicing Catholicism with the Vanden Brinks?
Oh, it's a wonderful question. I didn't want to leave them. They were my family. I loved them. I loved them fiercely, and it was heart-wrenching for me. But my grandmother survived, and she knew where I was, so she found me, and together we went to live in a horrible, cold, damp house, and mushrooms were growing on the walls of my room. And after the war, there was no food, and my grandmother and I would go into the woods every day and gather mushrooms and little sticks of wood, because there was one little stove in this house for heating the water and cooking. But I loved her, and I must tell you that all I wanted to do was go back to the Vanden Brinks. And also, I told my grandmother that we have to get up early because we have to go to 6 o'clock Mass every morning. And my grandmother, being a very progressive thinker, a kind of avant-garde person at the turn of the century, was unthreatened by things like this. But she didn't want to get up early because none of us seems to be a morning person. So she said, it's okay about church, but not 6 o'clock Mass. So she was very unthreatened by my Catholicism. And I did not ever know in my life that I was Jewish. A lot of German Jews were very, very assimilated. And so even though I was born in, this is the trick word, Scheveningen, which was a secret code word to know if you were German or you were Dutch. There was a password during the war, but where I was born, there was no Judaism practiced. My parents were from Germany, and many middle-class Jewish people in Germany were thoroughly assimilated and rather Germanic in their culture. And I don't know that Judaism was ever talked about, but I was born in 1937 in Holland. So I didn't miss it. And when years passed, I understood that I was Jewish and that the Germans were never going to win and take this away from me, and I was fiercely, proudly Jewish. So I didn't have a conflict. And I'm Jewish, and I am forever grateful for having been a good little Catholic girl.
One question now from Judah Belgrade.
So I have a question for Roman Kent. What was your first thought when you came to the United States after being liberated?
What was my what?
First thought after you came to the United States after being liberated.
It is hard to give you an answer what was my first thought. I would rather enlarge it and tell you what was my first thoughts. In the first place, I did not know much what is United States. United States for us in Europe, and you have to realize you're talking right now about 60, 70 years ago, and I can assure you that there was a different thinking in the United States about Europe there and what is now. It was just, call it a fairy tale that was an understanding that the streets in the United States are paved with gold, and we can go here and everybody can be a millionaire and have a home and a car. That was my imagination. And when I came to the United States, in a way, I first came to New York, and then after being here I came in here under the auspices of the United States government, because the United States government was so magnanimous, and they issued about 5,000 blank visas for orphans for the whole Europe. So we were here both, the Jewish and Gentiles. We came to the United States, we were sent to New York, and maybe from my accent you could maybe detect that I went later on to the south, to Atlanta, Georgia, because you heard I was studying in Emory University. So being first in New York and then going, after 3-4 weeks being here, going then to Atlanta, Georgia, I didn't know what in the hell I should think what is United States. Because here in New York, I have seen, to put it in today's language, people were integrated. There was no the barrier, color, white, and so on. When I went to Atlanta, Georgia, suddenly I see there are two nations here. They are colored and they are white. There were colored toilets and toilets for white, not only toilets. The water fountain, it was for white only and for colored only. In the buses, the colored people had to sit in the back, and in the front only white. In theaters, there was a special seating for the colored and for white. Even in the games, like the famous American game, the baseball, you couldn't play colored and white on the same team in Atlanta. So I was completely confused. What is going on here? What is America? And then to add to our confused experience, my brother and I almost went back to Europe. But that's a different story. I don't want to describe it now.
So we need to end, and I'm supposed to spend a minute or two wrapping things up. And I think I only want to say maybe 3 things. The first is to thank the organizers of this event for which takes an enormous amount of work, to thank all of you for taking the time to come, and to thank the organizers, not just for all the work they did, but for giving me the opportunity to spend some time learning about and to meet these two really extraordinary people. And so the second is to thank Renee and Roman for the work that they've done, keeping the importance of remembrance alive, and for translating it to people and reminding all of us that this is not simple history, but a lesson that needs to be learned for the future, and it's not simply remembering, but deeds. And so the third thing that I want to say, and the moment that I will really, and the thought that I personally will take away from this day, is the 11th commandment, Romans 11th commandment. Don't be a bystander, because it took enormous courage not to be a bystander during the war. I think in every generation, in different ways, we're called on not to be bystanders. It's true now, it will be true in the future. Not all of us can meet the challenge that the Vandenbrinks did, but we can all aspire to it. And thank you, Roman, for giving me that putting that aspiration into words. So thank you to everybody.
We'd like to invite the choir onto the stage for our candle lighting ceremony. Today, we honor the memory of the victims of the Holocaust. We do so by hearing sobering testimony from two human beings, two Jews who experienced the Holocaust firsthand, by remembering the great Elie Wiesel, and now by lighting candles in memory of the dead, the murdered, the ones who lost their chance to live full, meaningful lives, all because of who they were, because they were different. And we light these candles with hope. Hope that no group of human beings, be they Jews, Syrians, or any other group, is subjected to such cruelty or acts of hatred ever again. Our candlelighters represent multiple generations, from the survivors to the children of our future. We call up these individuals to light our 7 candles. Renee Fink, Holocaust survivor.
I light this candle in memory of my murdered parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles. As a hidden child survivor from Holland, I light it also for the 1.5 million children who were murdered. As a Jew, I light it for the 6 million murdered Jews. As a citizen of the world, and as a member of the family of man, I light it for the 5 million murdered non-Jews. Thank you. This one.
Susan Irene Kent Abgen, daughter of Holocaust survivor Roman R. Kent. Ron Weiss, Merit Systems Protection Board, son of Holocaust survivor Irene Fogelweiss from Czechoslovakia, who spoke at our 2014 program and who survived concentration camps, but whose parents and 4 siblings perished. Michael Wolf, Federal Labor Relations Authority, son of Holocaust survivor Ernest Wolf, who at age 8 could not continue attending public school in Schluchtern, Germany, his family's home for over 300 years, and whose parents were forced into hiding in Germany. Adina Sif, student, Jewish Primary Day School of the nation's capital. Eliav Brooks Rubin, student, Jewish Primary Day School of the nation's capital. And our moderator, Ruth Marcus.
want to thank everyone for coming and to remind everybody that I think the 11th commandment, don't be a bystander, may be the hardest of all, but the most important of all. Thank you.